welcome. It's the 15th of December and we're opening the next window in the TooFatLardies Advent Calendar for 2023. And today is a very special day when, like Richard and Nick, we'll be playing our Christmas party game, the Defenestration of Lard. So the Defenestration of Lard allows you, if you've not played the game before, to hurl one aspect of miniature figure wargaming out of the metaphorical window to be dashed on the rocks or potentially the dung heap below. So the question for me from Richard and Nick was, which aspect of wargaming do I want to defenestrate and why? So as a few of you might know, I tend to try and be a glass half full kind of person. Don't like to linger on the things that annoy and irritate me because I think there's bad karma hanging around the corner if I do that. So I'm not generally the sort of person who grouches and grumbles about things to do with the hobby. However, since I've been asked the question, I did think of a few things which, well, maybe slightly can be annoying, at least to me. Now, full disclaimer, many of you won't be annoyed by any of this, so I do apologise in advance. You can all switch off. No, not all of you, just the ones who basically don't agree with me. Okay? Oh, well, one or two have gone, but not everyone. So for everyone who's still listening, thank you very much. So there were three things which possibly annoy me. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you can then put them on the table in front of me. That would not be kind. But the first thing which does slightly annoy me, and this is in no way critical of people who have created wonderful pieces of huge terrain, but a table which is disproportionately full of large single pieces of terrain always makes me kind of sigh a little bit. Now, there is obviously a great reason if your game revolves around the Alamo or Rorke's Drift or maybe the Arnhem Bridge to place a great big chunking piece of terrain in the middle of the table through which everything has to navigate and the whole game circles around that. That's okay. But it's the big piece of terrain because somebody has built a massive, great big, town hall, huge cathedral, space station, whatever it is, that because it's built, it has to be used in the game. And really, the footprint of that piece of terrain is vastly disproportionate to the other terrain items on the table. And all the other figures, units, tanks, whatever, have to manoeuvre around it. That does sometimes make me think, such a beautiful piece of terrain. Why does it have to be so big? Many of you know that I've always been interested in trying to small footprint the terrain so it doesn't take a disproportionate amount of space. And this isn't a moan about ground scale, but that is one thing that I have occasionally seen, and I do think to myself, that piece of terrain, okay, it looks wonderful, but it's taking up so much of the game space, sucking the oxygen out the table. So that's certainly one thing that I'd like gently to just push out the window, just defenestrate that. Number 2 on the list, pot pickers, is beautiful photographs in sets of Wargames rules. I always find them slightly intimidating. Please don't put them in. Just get somebody who's wonderful at art to do a fantastic piece of pencil or pen and ink study, not beautiful photos of terrain that my terrain's never going to be as good at and my figures are never going to reach that ability. I don't know why we started putting beautiful figures and wonderful terrain in photos and rules. It's just so dispiriting for the mere mortals among us. So I know that's not going to get defenestrated, but I'd like to. But the main bugbear, and one or two of you will know this, and I can't imagine anyone listening to this podcast is guilty of this. But if you are, it's nothing personal, but I'd like to defenestrate you. People who pick up Wargames figures, no, that's not a problem in itself. It's not just the person who picks up one figure. It's the person who picks up 7 or 8 in one hand. How can you do that? And it's the claw, the huge claw, the grabber, which comes down, doesn't just pick up one figure, but picks up 5 or 6, and not by their bases. Picking them up, the figures against figures, and just clutches them, drags them off to the side of the table. That is just my utter defenestration. Every time I've seen somebody do that, I have wanted to push them out the nearest window to land softly on the dung heap or rocks below. I've got to say, that just drives me absolutely nuts. So if you've ever done that, please never do it again. And you need to make a small penance at the Temple of Featherstone and possibly ablute yourself in the bath of Tony Baths to make sure that you don't use the grabber again. So one figure at a time, by the base if possible, please. That would be lovely, but it's definitely not 4 or 5 figures in a claw-like hand. And I'd also add that one doesn't want to see the close cousin of the claw, which is the fingers just picking up a figure by a sword. That's kind of not really what the sword's there for. It's not an easy, handy hook to grab the figure by. No, figures need to be lifted up by the bases. So if you have a claw-like hand, just make sure that claw-like hand goes around a figure's base and not 4 or 5 figures or the sword of a figure at once. But I'm sure one day I'll see somebody, hopefully none of the listeners to this Advent window, using a claw to catch figures on the table. But one of these days I will just make sure there's an open window somewhere in that War Games room. And if there is, it might just be a moment of real life defenestration of Lard.